Good morning. We've got a great audience here today. I'm Patricia Beeson. I'm the provost of the university, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's symposium commemorating Jonas Salk's 100th birthday. While he's best known for his work on the polio vaccine, today we're going to be focusing on a topic that became the major focus of his work after he completed his work on polio, and that is sustainability. The symposium, in addition to commemorating the 100th birthday of one of our greatest faculty members, sustainability at the university. This year, sustainability is intended to raise awareness about the issues of sustainability and also help the university develop a foundation for the future by developing a new curriculum in sustainability, by identifying research focus areas in sustainability where the university can have an impact on this very important challenge of our world. Today's symposium is going to provide a very strong foundation for these conversations that we're having by looking at sustainability from many different perspectives, and with a focus on the environment, the economy, global health, and the human dimensions of what's going to be required to bring about constructive change in this world. So I'm very excited by the lineup of speakers we have today. And before we get started, I would like to personally thank Professor Goldstein, Peter Salk, got the wrong one, and also Dean Burke for the excellent job of setting up this wonderful symposium. And with that, I'm going to quickly turn it over to Professor Goldstein.
Thank you so very much, Provost Beeson. And it is great to see all of you here. It's quite an audience, quite a turnout. It's my pleasure today to welcome you on behalf of the Graduate School of Public Health and of our Dean, Donald Burke, who greatly regrets his inability to attend. Our school was founded in 1948, largely in response to environmental issues related to our coal and steel industry in the area. Like the rest of Pittsburgh, and as I'm sure the Chancellor will tell you, we are a research powerhouse. We usually rank third or fourth among the 45 schools of public health in the country in our ability to attract competitive national funding. And Dean Burke would always point out that even the first two schools, Harvard and Hopkins, don't do as well as we do on a per capita basis in terms of our faculty. Today is a very special day, as you all know, the centenary of the birth of Jonas Salk, whose development of the polio vaccine was a keystone event in 20th century history. Its powerful example of the value of public health science resonates with us today and will for the foreseeable future. I'm old enough to remember my mother running around with a fly swatter trying to kill every fly because it was believed that flies transmitted polio. We have a similar near panic today with the very real threat of the Ebola virus. One of our students asked, why are we focusing on sustainability rather than on a virus threat, since we're honoring the centenary of someone who did so much to deal with a virus? And let me address this question by very briefly discussing the potential linkage between achieving sustainability and avoiding emerging infections. About a decade ago, the UN Environmental Program they choose each year an emerging issue to have as part of their global outlook approach, which they communicate to the environmental ministers of the world. And they asked us to hold a meeting here on emerging infections in the environment. As a result of this meeting, we added a couple of slides to the standard environmental health program. Let me show the first one if we can, or do I have this here? Here we go. Yep. That's not it. Anyhow, the first one basically asks the question, does overfishing off the west coast of Africa lead to increasing the risk of an emerging infection here in Pittsburgh? With the students, I usually tell them that we'll give the answer at the end of the lecture, and that's my way of sort of keeping them awake during the time. I also tell them that they better stay awake because the might be on the exam. But it's a very real question, and the answer at the end of the lecture is that there's been some studies published showing that the price of bushmeat, the likelihood that you will get bushmeat in West Africa, that you'll go out to the bush and kill meat, it has to do with the price of the fish in the market. And when there's overfishing, the price goes up. And this has impact well beyond just the price of fish. It has impacts on the environment in terms of endangered species, in terms of the change in the forest cover and the rainforest, because different trees depend upon wild animals. We've almost eradicated wild animals from large parts of rainforest because of the desire for protein among people when the price of fish goes up. Well, again, what does that have to do with emerging infections? Well, this is a slide, I'm sorry it doesn't show well, but it's from Dean Berg, who is one of the world's experts in emerging infections. And it shows a hunter who's basically killed a monkey and is butchering it. And as you can see, the machete is perhaps a quarter of an inch away from his fingers, and his fingers are in blood. If one wants to think of where an infection could come from, not necessarily Ebola, one has to worry about a primate-adapted virus that could then come to a human. Well, this is just an example of the many, many different ways in which there are linkages that need to be examined in a broad way if we're going to be able to deal with sustainability as an issue. And systematically linking these together is crucial for the future. I think you'll learn a lot from the presentations. I think you'll enjoy them today. And I hope each of you will take advantage of the opportunity to ask questions, which we'll have after each of the speakers. Before introducing them, I'd like to thank the sponsors and partners who made today's event possible: the Jonas Salk Legacy Foundation, members of the Salk Planning Committee, the Office of the Provost, the Jewish Healthcare Foundation, PNC, the Art K. Mellon Foundation, and UPMC. We're very grateful to you for providing us with the resources to develop this sustainability symposium. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Salk, a superb medical microbiologist in his own right, who has been the thought leader behind developing this symposium. Peter's impressive biography, as well as the biography of our other speakers, is present in the program. Peter?
Dr. Goldstein, thank you. Provost Beeson, Chancellor, it is such a pleasure and an honor to be here today with all of you to celebrate an event that has long been in the coming, which is the 100th anniversary of my father's birth. To be able to do this here in Pittsburgh, at the University of Pittsburgh, where he and his co-workers devoted so much to putting into the development of the first effective and safe polio vaccine. It's just a pleasure to come back here these many years later and to focus attention a little bit on the past in terms of what was done, but primarily on the future in terms of the greater needs of the world. And this issue of sustainability, which is now receiving the focus of attention here at the university, has such critical importance for us as a species and for this entire planet. My father, at the end of his life, was concerned with these sorts of issues, and I want to give you just a bit of a sense of the arc of his life so that you can have a bit of the perspective of where this interest came from and emerged. So let us see what I do next. Okay. This is my father later in his life. And towards the beginning, when he was in high school, he early on knew that he wanted to do something of significance for humanity. He thought initially that he would become a lawyer, get elected to Congress, and help change the laws which governed human life. He ended up in college changing his course. He took a course in chemistry, which he was essentially bitten by the bug of science, and that never let him go from that time on. He went on to medical school, and after medical school went to the University of Michigan to work with Dr. Thomas Francis on the first vaccine against influenza, an inactivated vaccine that was used in troops at the end of World War II. He then came on to Pittsburgh in 1947, intending to continue work on influenza and other viral diseases. Had a knock on the door from the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, the March of Dimes, who asked him if he would be willing to take part in a project to determine definitively the number of different types of poliovirus that existed, since that was necessary knowledge if one was going to make a vaccine that would cover all of the different types of polio. He said yes, this was an opportunity, and pulled together a very strong team of researchers here at the university. Jim Lewis, Julius Jungner, who is still with us, the only surviving member of that initial research team. He's a distinguished professor emeritus here at the university. Byron Bennett, Val Baisley, and others who are not shown in this picture, all of whom deserve credit for that major public health accomplishment. Very quickly, the typing program morphed into a project to develop an inactivated or killed vaccine against polio, which was initially tested at the Watson Home for Crippled Children close to Pittsburgh in 1952. And then afterwards, in 1953, those studies continued, and 1954 in the city schools here in Pittsburgh, leading to a huge national double-blind, in part, clinical trial which involved 1.8 million school children to determine definitively whether or not the vaccine was effective. On April 12th of 1955, the results were announced by the same Dr. Francis with whom my father had worked those years earlier. He had been responsible for the final design and then the evaluation of the results of that field trial. The news was greeted with enormous jubilation and relief. The vaccine was licensed the same day. If one can imagine the difference between that era and this, was introduced in this country. Within 6 years, the incidence of polio fell by 97% after the vaccine came along, from a peak of around 58,000 cases in 1952, and ultimately, with the addition of the oral vaccine, polio disappeared in this country, caused by the naturally occurring virus at the end of the 1970s. Shortly after the vaccine, starting around 1957, my father turned his attention to the next venture. He wanted to establish a new institute for experimental medicine, which would not only deal with the traditional problems of that field, diabetes, vaccines, viral diseases, etc., but also would take into account and come to grips with those problems that arise from man's relationship to man. The initial intention was to set up that institute here at the University of Pittsburgh at what was initially Municipal Hospital, where the polio vaccine work was done, and then afterwards was acquired by the university and became what it now is, Salk Hall. Didn't work out back then to do that here. My father went on to California and ended up establishing the institute in La Jolla, working with the brilliant and wonderful architect Louis Kahn to design and build the structure that you see here, an inspirational setting that is now doing a wonderful basic biological research that's in elucidating understandings of of both fundamental biology and the cause, prevention, and cure of disease. My father continued research in his own laboratory there on the immune system, cancer, autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis, and then later on engaged in a project to work on an inactivated vaccine for use in HIV/AIDS. But he also continually was working on and thinking about and lecturing about fundamental issues having to do with humanity. He wrote 4 books. The first was Man Unfolding. The second, The Survival of the Wisest, which is the sub-theme of this conference. The third, World Population and Human Values, A New Reality, which was co-authored by my brother Jonathan, who is here with us today in the audience. And finally, Anatomy of Reality, Merging of Intuition and Reason. And I just want to show you one image that was central in my father's thinking, which was this S-shaped curve, or sigmoid curve. It represents a fundamental pattern that is seen in nature. I'll give you a couple of examples. Over the course of time, if you take a couple of fruit flies and put them into a closed container and continue to feed them, their population will grow very rapidly in an exponential fashion, doubling and doubling, doubling. But even though they continue to have food, somehow as their population increases, the fruit flies recognize that there are constraints that they need to respect if they're going to continue to survive and thrive, and they know how to modulate their reproductive rate so that the population plateaus. The same kind of thing happens if you take normal cells from the body and put them into tissue culture. Initially, they will double, 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 double at an exponential rate, but then as they begin to touch each other, there's a phenomenon called contact inhibition. And the cells get this feedback of what's going on in their environment, and the same thing happens. The rate of growth slows and then plateaus. Now, the way we've been going on this planet in recent centuries and decades has been this exponential growth just continuing. We started this century in the 1900s, somewhere around 1 to 2 billion people. We are now up at 7-odd billion people, and the projection is that by the end of this coming century, we might be at 10 or 11 billion. So what is our fate? We cannot continue at that rate forever. This is a finite planet. You just can't. There are only so many people you can squeeze on the face of the earth. So that's not a possible trajectory. We don't want to take the trajectory that the deer do. If they overgraze their environment, their population will increase and then crash once they have depleted their food supply. So if we're going to make it, this issue of sustainability is crucial. It's at the core of what we're facing right now. We need to make a transition from this upward curving portion of this S-shaped curve to the portion where we also see our population plateauing and stabilizing. My father looked at these 2 different parts of this curve, and he referred to the first part as epic A, and the second part as epic B. What he thought was that there are different forces and values and attitudes that characterize the way of living that would be appropriate in these different portions of the growth curve, the population curve. In this first phase, epic A, the focus is on growth. In the second phase, epic B, it's on stabilization of growth. The emphasis in the first phase, part of this curve, on quantity. We need to have a shift towards a focus on quality. And rather than competition, sort of a win-lose kind of sets of relationships, with a self-oriented focus towards ourselves, our families, our neighborhoods, our countries, we need to be shifting into an era of cooperation with an attitude of mutualism, where we recognize that we are all together on this one planet. Anything that happens to anyone, anywhere, affects us, and we have to do what we need to do to move into the future all together. Just one other point with respect to this chart, and that's the little gap that's shown here. That's the point of inflection, where the shape of the curve changes from its first, the part in the first portion to the second portion. That's where we are right now if we're going to follow this trajectory. So this is a unique moment on this planet. It's never happened before on a global scale, and if we're successful, it won't happen again. So our job now is unique. We have to do whatever we can to encourage just a shift in emphasis in the values from what was of importance, of great importance in the first phase, to what now is important as we move into this era of sustainable growth, sustainable development. So with that, I want to thank you all again for being here, and the university for hosting this conference, the Graduate School of Public Health, and I'd like to introduce with great pleasure the Chancellor of the University, Dr. Patrick Gallagher.
Wasn't that wonderful? I am pleased to join you this morning and to add my welcome as well. This is an opportunity for all of us to reflect on the university's historic connection to Dr. Jonas Salk and to draw attention to his commitment to a sustainable human future. And the two preceding speakers could not have done that more eloquently. But as we know, the story of Dr. Jonas Salk's milestone achievement in polio vaccine is a story of sustainability. It is also one that is a human story and one about how innovation can change the world around us. And many of these elements get highlighted in a short story of John and Jimmy Brown. In the summer of 1952, John, who was then 6, and his little brother Jimmy, who was 1, lived in Penn Hills. Their parents were looking forward to warm, lazy summer days outside when suddenly John and Jimmy grew feverish. Their necks stiffened and their muscles tightened, and a red and white quarantine sign was tacked onto the family's front door. The brothers had been exposed to the menace of polio. They were hospitalized and treated at what was then known as Municipal Hospital, 3 floors above where Dr. Salk and his team at Pitt were working on a polio vaccine. They passed a few seasons in the hospital ward. They could see Pitt Stadium outside, and in the autumn heard the music of the marching band. But many, many days and nights they spent apart. Jimmy's crib was in a separate room, and the brothers were not able to even see or touch each other. In the hospital, a caring community looked after both of the boys. A nurse whom they called an angel brought them popsicles in the night, and a pastor who came to visit brought messages of love from parents and family who couldn't see them. During their stay, a team of doctors and nurses would come and collect blood samples from John and Jimmy. The 2 little boys were among the thousands who sacrificed and rolled up their sleeves participating in the thoughtful research trials that enabled Dr. Salk to announce on April 12, 1955, that he finally had a vaccine that would end polio's reign of terror in the United States. The innovation that was the Salk polio vaccine was conceived through a partnership. It included not only the dedicated medical staff, but it also included the researchers, the drug companies, the federal government, the schools, the families, and the charitable thousands who supported the organization that is now known as the March of Dimes. It was a partnership that made possible what is now being called one of the greatest achievements of the 20th century, and a partnership that ranks the Salk vaccine as one of the highlights amid a century of university research, standing next to the exploration of space and the development of the computer. What Dr. Salk and his team proved was that partnership, that is a university, a community, a government, a technology, and innovation working together, is the magic sauce for sustainability. When systems work together for environmental, economic, or social well-being, there are long-term benefits. Smart and vital decisions today will pay huge dividends for human good in the future. And I'm proud to say that this university continues to share the same commitment to a sustainable human future. And a few areas to highlight where Pitt continues to lead the way. Earlier in 2014, the university was listed for the 3rd consecutive year in the Princeton Review's Guide to Green Colleges as one of the most environmentally responsible higher education institutions in the United States. Energy conservation at Pitt has resulted in more than $44 million in energy cost avoidance since 1996. Pitt currently has 8 LEED certified buildings, 6 gold and 2 silver, and is currently pursuing 8 additional LEED certifications, reaching for the highest distinctions in being water resourceful, healthful, and environmental friendly. And in April of this year, the university announced a nearly $38 million investment in support of sustainability academics and research. Now, we know that these kinds of sustainability efforts and partnerships are essential. More than 50 years ago, it enabled these 2 young boys, John and Jimmy, and millions of others to survive polio. As the university's work in sustainability continues to grow, today's symposium is an opportunity to bring together today's Pitt campus and the Pittsburgh community for thought-provoking presentations looking at the different ways we can transform what the environment, public health, and the economy represent. So thank you, and have a great symposium.